Can you tell us what you know about the virus, Professor? Liz couldn't tell if she was awake or if she was dreaming, but the memory of the TV broadcast she had watched was vivid in her mind. If she was asleep, her body was being held upright by the people crushed against her. Certainly, the bearded professor said. His beard was neatly trimmed to match his immaculate hair. The Nosferatu virus, as the public are wanting to call it, spreads via bodily fluids and in the air we breathe. So it's airborne? The TV show host interrupted. Yes, it is highly durable, capable of surviving on most surfaces. Its main mode of transmission is respiratory, but it also has the ability to infect the skin and mucous membranes. There was a hint of annoyance in the professor's face, as if the question was too stupid to even comprehend. Is there any way to tell if anyone is infected? Continued the host. Not in the early stages, no. The symptoms are very mild at first, going unnoticed in most people. In the latter stages, fever and joint pain are common, as is sensitivity to light. It usually takes around 3 days for these to develop. What about being bitten? Inquired the host, to which the professor seemed to brighten as if the question excited him. Ah, that is a totally different scenario. Bites infect the host much faster. Those bitten will change much quicker. The saliva of Homo vampirus acts almost like a catalyst to spread the infection through the victim's system. Strangely, the professor's smile emerged as he spoke. So, we are definitely stating that the virus mutates people into a new species? The TV host tried to clarify. I wouldn't use the word mutate, and you must remember, it is only the males of our species that undergo the change, corrected the professor. Are women immune to the virus then? Don't be ridiculous. For women, the virus is debilitating, occasionally lethal. But the lack of a Y chromosome means they do not become converted. Instead, they seem to become the most sought-after food of the virals. The professor forced a serious look onto his lips. Have there been no reports of any female vampires? Asked the now concerned host. The professor simply shook his head. Is there any word on a cure, Professor? A cure? There is not. And there will never be a cure, the professor stated boldly. That's a frightening statement, Professor. The audience seemed to agree. Liz was ripped from her thoughts by the lurching of the train, the brakes clearly being applied. She wouldn't say she was comfortable with the stench around her, but she had acclimatized to it. Looking at her watch, she saw that she had been on her feet for over 12 hours. Her calves were sore and threatening to spasm. Ruby had been spared most of it. Being in the corner, there had been just enough room for the child to sit on the cold metal ground, her knees held against her chest by defensive arms. It was only when the blinding lights erupted back into life that Liz got to see how uncomfortable her daughter looked. Tired and petrified eyes looked back up at her, and Liz thrust a hand down for her daughter, who eagerly took it. The train lurched again, finally coming to a stop. There was hushed silence in the carriage, the uncertainty of what awaited everyone weighing on them. What would they find when the doors finally opened? Was this really the safety that was promised? Above her head, the air conditioning buzzed, bringing fresh oxygen to those who were close to giving up altogether. There were over 100 people in here with Liz, but she had no idea how many were on the train in total. The door to freedom finally opened, and a wail of relief surged through the people like a wave. Without being told, the women started to unload themselves, the pressing on Liz gradually easing. She had already decided to wait and be the last one out. If there was terror rather than sanctuary out there, she wanted to spare her daughter that for as long as possible. Liz already knew in her heart that this wasn't a rescue, but she kept this certainty from her daughter. Not all the women got off the train. As the masses unloaded themselves, some bodies fell to the floor. Some might have just fainted, but others were clearly dead, the trip and the trauma too much for them. Standing firm in the corner, Liz waited until everyone who could exit did so, a dozen still forms left behind. Liz stepped forward hesitantly. She expected to be told off by these new arrivals, but at most, she got a blank stare. Dressed as they were in orange jumpsuits, these people looked like prisoners. It was also hard to miss that they were all females. Liz knew she couldn't stay here any longer. She urged her daughter to stand, pulling on Ruby's arm harder than she needed to, which got a squeal of complaint. When they reached the open door, Liz realized her prospects outside the train weren't much improved. She saw a similar setup to the previous station, except the wire mesh tunnels leading away from this platform were all color-coded. A loudspeaker voice was telling them to leave the platform by their designated color, each carriage arranged so that it was matched up to the correct tunnel. Liz could see that each tunnel led into an array of long tents, and she stepped down from the train, arms held up for Ruby to jump into. As weary as she was, she didn't lower her daughter to the ground, the arms snaking around her neck as the child tried to get some sort of comfort from the only person who could protect her. Protect? Liz knew she could do nothing for her daughter now, not in that regard. Warily, she joined the back of the line to her tunnel. There were more women in orange jumpsuits inside the tents, but no men were visible. There didn't need to be because there were surveillance cameras covering every inch and every interaction that could occur in here. Several of the new arrivals tried to converse with those in orange, but every attempt at an interaction was ignored. It was a slow march to the tents, where large signs instructed all those present to undress so they could shower. Stepping out of the cold air, Liz watched the assorted women follow the instructions in numb disbelief. Ruby protested at being made to strip naked, but Liz persisted until her child relented. Being at the back now seemed like the worst idea possible. If something bad was to happen, better to have it over with quickly. This was a scene Liz thought had been retired to the horrors of history. Surely the tent they were being urged into was merely a shower. History couldn't repeat like that, could it? The Holocaust that almost saw the extermination of European Jews had been a prolonged event brought on by forces that had taken years to rise to power. And there was no discrimination here. Every religion imaginable was likely represented. Only there was a different type of segregation. Everyone now walking to the showers was the female of the species. Liz knew the only choice was to keep moving forward, so she pressed her child onwards. She felt resigned to her fate. She could have screamed, could have ripped at her own flesh, but that wouldn't have helped anyone. If anything, it might have set some of the others off, and there was no telling what might have happened then. Last in line, Ruby and Liz stepped through into the shower area. Surely they weren't about to be put to death. It would have been much easier just to have killed them all at the railway station or in their homes. Above her, the shower heads loomed. A temporary affair by the look of it, likely something used for soldiers in the field. Catching a sound, Liz threw a harried glance behind her, the tent flaps being closed by one of the orange-clad minions. Just in that briefest moment, Liz made eye contact, utter sorrow and regret looking back at her. "I know what is about to happen to you," those eyes said, "but there is nothing I can do to help you." Liz wasn't to know that the tent flaps now made an airtight seal. This tented area was big enough to house everyone from the red carriages. There would be similar setups for those of a different color, Liz imagined, and she wasn't wrong in that regard. Holding her daughter tight to her midriff, Liz waited for the icy water to descend. Experience told her there would be no heated shower here. She was right, but there wasn't any water either. As the invisible gas began to fill the air around her, Liz knew her worst fears were confirmed. Before anyone had a chance to panic, people began to fall to the ground as the effects of the gas worked quickly. The last thought Liz had before unconsciousness took her was that she had failed her daughter. When Liz woke up, she was no longer naked. That was the only good thing about her situation. She was wearing a jumpsuit with some thin and feeble slippers perched on her feet. But this jumpsuit wasn't orange. It was red. She was lying on a mattress that had been placed on the floor of a wire-walled cell that was 3 meters by 3 meters. The ground underneath her and the back wall were concrete, with a chemical toilet the only other thing in her enclosure. It took her several seconds to realize there was a cannula in the back of her hand. Because the walls of her cell were made of thick wire, she could see other cells aligned along both sides of a wooden walkway. The whole scene was illuminated by bright fluorescent strips above. By the looks of things, she was the first person to wake up. Where the hell was her daughter? "Ruby!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. The only answer was the delayed sound of a door opening and a pounding in her skull. As in the tents, it was obvious that she, and everyone imprisoned here, was under constant surveillance. Whatever this place was, it had been built specifically for the purpose of holding the people now trapped here. Footsteps wandered toward her, their owner probably drawn by her evident transgression. Not knowing what was about to transpire, Liz cowered against the rear wall of her cell, the cold of the concrete eating quickly through her clothing. The footsteps came closer, the angulation of the wire cages slowly showing the tall man who was approaching. Before he was fully in her sight, she knew who it was. Her heart dropping even further into despair. She should have been elated, but she knew there would be no rescue here. It was her husband. "Hi, babe," her husband said, stopping outside her cage. He fiddled with the padlock that kept the door to her cage firmly closed. Liz felt the last of her resolve melt from her, because it was obvious here was something very wrong with John. "Oh, John." "I'm really sorry about this, Liz," John said. Only it wasn't John anymore. The eyes told her that. White and lifeless. The eyes she had seen so many times on the TV. He hadn't died. He had become infected. She watched as a ripple flowed through him, and he gripped the wire, fingers flexing to show long talons where fingernails had once been. "You really don't want to know how much I want to be in there with you." "Where's Ruby, John?" Liz begged. "Ah, yes, the child. Such a sweet thing." "Please, John." "Don't worry, we haven't hurt her. Not yet, anyway. It really is good to see you, though." She could see the way he was looking at her. There was no love there, just pure animal hunger. "What have you done to her?" Liz demanded. "Me? Trust me, I haven't been allowed anywhere near her, which is for the best because the temptation to rip her entrails out and feast would have been too great." John's eyes kept scanning the wire as if he was trying to find a way to get in at her. "Normally they don't let us in here, but we are allowed just this once." "We?" Liz asked. "You really don't understand, do you, Liz?" "No, and I don't care. All I want is to be able to see Ruby." She would give her life for just 5 minutes with her only child. "You will if you behave. You will have lots of me time. But most of your days will be spent here, in this cell. I hope you get to know your neighbors." John actually laughed at that. "I don't understand." "Well, I suppose I'd better do the whole villain thing," John replied, mocking her. There was a harshness to his voice, as if he'd smoked 40 a day all his life. The skin around his face was taut with evidence of weight loss, the cheeks sunken in. This was definitely John's body. Liz just didn't know the person who occupied it. "You will notice the cannula in the back of your hand," John said. "What are you?" Liz fingered the thing in her skin, fighting a strong temptation to rip it out. "You know what I am, Liz, and don't interrupt. Being close to you like this pains me." He inhaled deeply, savoring the odor that seeped from her body. "I can hear your heart beating, your blood pulsing. Never have you been more desirous to me than you are right now." "What do you want from me, John?" "Why, your blood, of course," John said. "Every other day one of those orange bitches will come in here and extract some. We will take enough so as to just keep you alive. I'm hungry, you see, and I have a voracious appetite." "But you're my husband." "So they say, but if I'm honest, I barely remember you. But we are married, so you have been assigned to me as my property." "Assigned?" The word didn't seem to make sense to Liz. "Yes, Liz. I am going to feed off you. I reckon you will be good for a few years. And when you are finally nothing more than a dried-up husk, you will be replaced by Ruby." "No, you can't do this," Liz begged. "Of course we can. This is happening all across the country, Liz. The women are being rounded up to be farmed. So much easier than hunting you all down, and this way we keep the stock from getting ravaged." "We aren't animals," Liz said defiantly. "Oh, but you are. Juicy cattle, ripe for the bleeding. Be thankful you were married to me. Many of those who aren't attached to a surviving vampire are sent off to be breeding stock. There are so many of us now. We need to keep the farms stocked." "Farms? Was this what this place was?" "Those too old or infertile, well, we have our fun with them," John added. The grin on his face was manic. "But the women in orange?" questioned Liz. "How could they walk about so freely?" John actually shivered in disgust. There are some of you who taste vile to us. They were given a choice, work their lives away or be given to our more sadistic brothers. But why do I get such special treatment? Because you are mine. Your daughter is mine. Hell, I might even stick another baby in you just to keep my family going. I'll kill you if you come near me, Liz warned. No, you won't. You will be my pet until I tire of you, and then you will be given to the dogs to devour. Liz didn't know it, but John wasn't referring to the canine of the species. The majority of males descended further than others into a savage, rabid-like creature. You are lucky, really. There aren't that many vampires who retained their cognitive abilities. If not for me, things could have gone so much worse for you. John stepped back from the wire. Here, you will be fed twice a day. You might not find the taste to your liking, but the food is designed for maximum blood output, and you will eat it because your daughter's well-being hangs in the balance. Don't you feel anything for me? Liz asked. You are food, Liz. The sooner you realize that, the sooner you will come to love your new home. To hell with you, Liz screamed, which woke some of her fellow prisoners. Their muffled voices seemed to agitate John. He stepped back from the cage. I'll see you soon, Liz. We'll catch up and talk about the old times. But in the meantime, don't go running off. John turned and strode out the way he had come. Liz wanted to show more defiance, to hurl abuse after him in the hope that he would tear the door off her cage and rip her throat out. But that would be selfish. She had a daughter somewhere in this facility that she needed to try and protect, and if that meant Liz had to endure and suffer for decades so that John would keep his hands off Ruby, then that was exactly what she would do. A mother's love could endure many things, but could it endure that fate?